Hi, this is Michael from Expanse VR and welcome to the second part of the Cinemachine and Timeline tutorial series. If you haven't already, I would highly recommend checking out the first video first. That covers the timeline section of this tutorial, and after we've covered Cinemachine in this video, at the end we'll be combining Cinemachine with timeline, so it's really important that you do understand that concept. To check out part 1, just click on the link above or check out the description for the link there as well. So for those that don't know exactly what Cinemachine is an add-on to Unity that gives you a set of tools to allow you to dynamically use what they call virtual cameras in your game. Most often you'll see these used for things like intros, which is what you just saw at the beginning of this video, where I've used it as a nice little intro leading up to the menu system. But you can also use it for other things like a much more intuitive follow along camera system that doesn't need to necessarily be programmed. And that's another great thing about the Cinemachine tools, is that there is very little programming required. This allows you to be a lot more creative and focus on actually getting the finished product out than having to worry about the code. Also, it's also great for the more creatives that could be on a team. Now, this scene here is one that I've done earlier and has everything already implemented. Here you can see all the different cameras that I'm using, the Dolly track, which is just here. And we will be coming back to this scene at the end of the video, just so you can see what can be accomplished with something in the high definition render pipeline. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and of course hit that notification button down below to make sure you are notified whenever I post a new tutorial for you. So jumping back into our scene from the last video, the one that we're working on, the next step obviously is going to be adding in some virtual cameras to start working with Cinemachine. So if you come up to the top here and just click on Create Virtual Camera, you'll notice that our game scene has changed and it's now reflecting where our virtual camera is. The very first thing to know with Cinemachine and the virtual cameras is that they don't replace the main camera. They're in fact kind of like empty placeholders. The main camera is still the one that is working, and if you add any post-processing volumes or anything like that to the main camera, they will still take effect with your virtual camera. Simply being, the virtual camera is just going to move your main camera around where it is. So if we look up here, this is our virtual camera. And if we click on a main camera, you can see it's in the same spot as our virtual camera. So we zoom that in, zoom it out, etc., etc. Now, if we add in a second virtual camera, which is now in a different position, I'll just move it over here to make it a little bit more obvious what's going on. We'll zoom it in here. You will see that the position of our virtual camera and our main camera are now the same. And if we look at our main camera, it's now got this new component added to it, the Cinemachine brain. And this controls a lot of what goes on. And if you noticed in the first field here, you can see the live camera and it's got the virtual camera too. Now it is grayed out. You cannot change this. This is just automatically assigned by the Cinemachine brain. And the way that it assigns it is the last added or last enabled virtual camera. And to show you how that works, so we've got virtual camera 2 here and virtual camera 1. If I disable the virtual camera 2, there you go, you see our virtual camera 1 is taken over, and again our main camera is in that position. If we re-enable virtual camera 2, it pops back over, or vice versa. If we disable and re-enable virtual camera 1, our main camera is going to jump back over there because that's now been associated in the Cinemachine brain. Now, you don't need to worry about the fact that Cinemachine brain does this automatically for you and you can't assign it, because we're going to be using other ways to actually start changing this up. And most importantly, we're going to be using Timeline. But that's just a quick rundown of how to put in your first virtual cameras. But we want to do a little bit more, and before we jump into any of the other parts of it, we're just going to show you some of the simple things. So if we just grab our first one here, and the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the follow function here, and I'm just going to attach our car to that, and straight away it's going to change where our virtual camera is, and we're just going to change that up ourselves. I just need to change the rotation, get a bit closer. Just change that to 0. And I'm just going to get it here so it looks like a bit of a follow camera for our car. Just over there so we don't see any of the clipping. And if I push play now, it follows along with our car as expected. The only thing is that we can see that it sort of does a little bit of a catch up. And if we look here at our body, so this part here is our options for our follow. What we're going to do is we're going to change the dampening, and we don't need any dampening at all. We can just do that. And as you can see, it's sitting in place nicely and following our camera along. And the next thing that we will do is show you with our second camera, which is over here. And I'm just going to click on that solo one like we talked about. I'm just going to bring it down. And we're going to look at the second most used function, which is, if I just get this guy out for a second, so see what he's looking at, go back to our second camera. Same thing, I just want him to be nice and level. We're going to use the LookAt function, and he's going to be looking, the virtual camera is going to be looking at our character here. And as soon as we do this, you can see there's quite a few changes to our screen. And this is what they call the aiming mechanism, which lets us see how the virtual camera functions. And we're going to change this up in just a minute. So all we need to do then is disable our first virtual camera, because if we don't, the Cinemachine brain is automatically going to default to our first virtual camera. And when we push play, our car drives up, and now you can see that our virtual camera is checking out and following. So our second virtual camera is looking at the player as he moves. Now, if we go back to our virtual camera 2 and we bring up our character, we can look at the aim here, and there's a few different options that we have. The first one being the tracked object offset. And let me just pull this out so you can see it properly. There it is, tracked object offset. And if you look into our game view, it's pretty obvious that the little yellow dot there near the feet of our character, that's where the camera is aiming at. And for instance, in this scene, that doesn't look too great for me. If you've done any sort of photography or videography and you know about your rule of third, this doesn't really work. So what we're going to do is use the Y to point closer to the head. And now for me, the scene is looking a little bit better. Now, if we wanted to have our character looking into the scene as he was walking, and what I mean by that is something like this, which is something quite often done in cinematography and photography. We can do it this way with the tracked offset, but the problem is that when we push play, wheels up, you can see that it starts doing some weird things. And this is because our character's moving now away from the camera, and it works on the tracking of where the play is relative to where we're looking. What we can actually do though is down here is another option, which is the screen X and Y. And we can do the same thing for this one with our Y and move it up. to where we want it. And we can actually move it this way here now. And what we're going to see is this will work because it doesn't change how we're tracking. The tracking point is still in the same position. It's just that our screen maintains a different position based on where that point is. And again, if you've ever done any photography or videography, you can see now that we've kind of set up once again the rule of thirds. So either way works, just knowing that one is changing the way that the object is tracked and the other way is just changing where the screen is relative to the tracked object. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish, either could work. For the moment though, I am just going to go back to where we were. And then we're just going to use the tracking of the head there. I think it's just easier to visualize for myself for this one. The next option we're going to look at is the dead zone space. And while we're not going to be able to do much with the height of the dead zone here, we can do something with the width. I'm just going to use the height just so you can see the blue area disappearing. And we'll come to what that blue area is shortly. But this is going to be very obvious what is happening once we push play. Let's just make that width even bigger. Now you're going to notice that once our car pulls up, one second, let's change the offset of the tracking. Well, you would have seen what's just happening there, but one second, let's bring this back to 0. I know what's happening here. It's because our animation is causing my character to jump to where it is. I'm just going to move him, and this is something that you'll see with animations and timelines. I think that's roughly where it is. Yeah, close enough. What I'm going to do is change the camera now to get him back in the center. And that's roughly the center. And now you will see that he doesn't move until he's gotten out of the dead space and goes into what is called the soft zone, which is the next part that we'll have a look at in just a second. So again, because we're not doing any vertical movement in this, we're just doing horizontal movement, changing the soft zone height isn't going to do much for us. It's only the width. And we're not going to notice anything with the soft zone until we make some other changes. And the change that we're going to make here is our dampening, which we haven't touched on yet. And again, we can't do much with the vertical one, but we're going to really crank up the dampening on the horizontal plane. And so it's now going to track and gets to the soft zone. And now you're seeing that it didn't really move. Actually, let's make that a little bit more obvious for us by bringing back that dead zone a little bit, just so we can get some movement very quickly. And I will bring back the dampening just a bit so we can see the effect better. So he's moving, hits the soft zone, and the dampening of the camera is causing it to not move too fast. So instead of being a jerky reaction, it's nice and smooth. It's an effect that you may want when you're creating a cutscene like this. So what the soft zone does though is anything outside the soft zone, so this red area, the camera will stop tracking. It will prevent, I think that's the right term, it stops it from tracking. And what it means by that is if we now decrease the soft zone, so I'm going to bring it right back here, add a little bit more drag so that it delays a little bit more. Again, going to extreme so you can see what happens. So moving, hits the soft zone, but as soon as it hits this red area, it continues the tracking. So the soft zone is effectively where our dampening takes effect. And once we get back into this red zone here, then it continues to track as normal. Again, it's just for making different effects. And lastly, with the bias here, all it really does, if we just make another dead zone, the soft zone a little bit bigger, you can create a bias to one side or the other of the screen. So for instance here, we've got a very narrow, next to non-existent soft zone on one side of our character and a big soft zone on the other side. Now that we have an understanding of how those two main functions of this virtual camera work, let's actually take away our second virtual camera. And we're going to grab ourselves a Dolly camera with track. And this here is actually going to set us up two things. One is another virtual camera. So you can see our VCam2 is back. And it's also going to give us what is called a Dolly track. And quite simply, the Dolly track is just something that the camera will run across. And what I'm going to do is pull that track down, move along to here. So we're sort of running, yeah, that works out, across here. And you will notice straight away that there's some balls with numbers on them. We got 0 and 1 here. 0 is our first position, 1 is our next position. And if we look over here into our Cinemachine smooth path, which is what runs the Dolly track, you can see the waypoints here, and we can even add extra ones in, which is what I'm going to do for the moment, just to give us 3 here. And now you can see that third one that's appeared. And when you click on each one, you can actually move them around just like if you were moving a normal object. And I'm going to do the same thing here. In fact, let's move it around a bit more. So we've got a nice big curve. And if I now click on, I think it's the virtual camera itself. Yes, here we go, in the body, the tracked body. So you've got path position here, we've got the set to 0. And if we scroll through, you're going to see our camera go along its track from 0 to 1, which is that position there, to 2, which is our third position. And if you remember, we can actually have our LookAt function here. Same thing, we'll change that so it's looking... actually, no, I wanted to do it here. So it's looking at the head. So now our virtual camera is going to be using its function LookAt. And if we then move it along the path, you can see that it's going to follow our character. And the best part is if I push play, and we're going to do this manually, even with the character walking, we can follow him along, which gives ourselves some new dynamics to how our camera can interact with the scene. Now, if we want to automate that, instead of doing it manually, we need to create a new animation. So with our virtual camera here, we're going to add an animation. We click on here and go to our animation window, create one. Oh, I haven't created one yet. So new folder, animations. And we'll call this VCam2 animation. And all we're going to do is hit record, move him around a little bit, back to 0. Fine, give ourselves some time, about a minute. We'll figure it out in a second, and just go to 2. If we push play, okay, that's way too fast. Let's make it 2 seconds. I think our guy walks a little bit slower than that, so let's make it closer to 3. This is going to pose a slight problem for us in a second, and we'll see that, but let's just go with that from the moment. So we'll stop recording, go to animations. That's working fine, except for the fact that we would like it to start a little bit later. So you think the length of time was fine, it just needs to move up a little bit. So if we move it to say about there, it should be closer to what we want. Yeah, we can see it's a little bit longer we need than that. Probably closer to 7 actually. And pushing play again, we can see him walking around and it's tracking nice and smoothly. I might even drag that out by 1 more second just to get the point across. And yeah, there we go, looking nice now. Perfect. So that is how the Dolly system works. And if we go back to our Dolly track, there's not too many options in here. Resolution, just as if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see there's like these little square segments. That's the resolution. So the higher we do it, the more segments they have in, which will make for a smoother movement, but this does hit performance as well. For me, I think for this length, 20 looked fine. Loops, obviously, if we do that, it will circle all the way back to the beginning. And you can see it actually creates its own little animation one to do that. And the waypoints are obviously self-explanatory what they are. And for me, the Dolly track, the LookAt, and the follow functions are probably the most used ones in Cinemachine, and the ones that you'll most likely use in the beginning. So I'm not going to get into the other options that we have in Cinemachine. I may leave that for another video on a more advanced Cinemachine tutorial, but for the moment, if you can get your head around just these ones here, you'll be doing pretty well and have a lot of options to create some very good creative cutscenes. Finally, we need to be able to combine these elements in Cinemachine into our timeline. So that is what we're going to be doing next. Now, the really good part is that we've done most of the hard work now, and the next part is fairly simple. And if you don't remember, we just click on our car up here in the hierarchy, and then we click on timeline to bring up what we had done in the previous episode. And if you're just joining us for this episode, I really highly recommend that you do see that first one, and the link should be above now. So the next step is adding in our actual Cinemachine into our timeline, which is very simple. All we need to do is right click over here and hit Cinemachine track. And what you're actually going to do is drag in your main camera. And that's going to set up because it's actually looking for a Cinemachine brain, which is obviously attached to our main camera. Then we just click here and we're going to add a Cinemachine virtual camera base. And the first one we can do is our first camera. And we'll just repeat that process and add in our second camera. And we're going to drag this over here. And just like before, you can blend in the two cameras, which is what we want. We want to have it so that smoothly transitions from one camera to the other. And we'll play around with this here. And this will just be the speed of the transition. And for the moment, we're just going to do for the length of our little cutscene here. And if I push play now, actually before I do that, we're just going to disable our character and pushing play. And there you go, you can see that transition, that nice smooth transition from one camera to the other. And that's pretty much just how simple the timeline and Cinemachine is. And for instance, if we go back to our timeline, click on our car again, and say we drag this out to here, you can see the very smooth pan between the two. And if we wanted to add in yet another virtual camera, it's very easy to add it in and stick it on the timeline. So this is our third camera. What he is going to do is he is going to follow our character. Just going to reset that to 0. Where are we gone? Reset that as well. So now we're right in the center. Bring him up. Actually, I'll need my character back for just that split second. Through, rotate him 180, so he's facing our character. And I'm just going to frame this up just a little bit better. Yeah, there we go. So that's our third camera. All set up. We'll get rid of our character again before I forget. Jump into our timeline. And same thing as before, we click over here, add another one in for our third camera. Just make sure I've got the right one there. Yes, and I'm going to drag this down here. This time I'm going to shorten up. So once we get to that sort of point where it starts looking around, we're going to transfer over to that other one. And again, a nice smooth transition. And if we push play, along with the car, we're going to swing over to our other one. And once we get here, we're going to swing back to our guy here. And as you can see, it's a little bit more off-center than what I wanted. So if we just... I think we just need to adjust our X down to -0.1. Give that a try again. What do we want that? 0.3, I think it was. 0.35 is looking good. So 0.35, and just remembering to get rid of that dampening so we don't get that little bit of a seesaw action. And following around. Yeah, but that looks pretty good now. I think the seesaw action might be because it kept changing his position and the way the follow works, but that should be fine for now. So if we come back to this original scene that was done in the high definition render pipeline, the only difference between what we've already done in this is that my character, while it has an animation for walking and idling and everything, the movement is actually being handled slightly different. I don't know if I mentioned it previously, but one of the problems with doing it the animation way for movement is that if the surface is uneven or on a slope, etc., it's not quite going to work. So what I've done here is actually added a nav mesh agent to the character, which you can see down here, and a controller script to operate the nav mesh agent. And all it's doing is actually, I'll bring up the nav mesh so you can see there. It's just a very simple one. And all it's doing is walking from point A to the target point B. And by the way, if you want an in-depth tutorial on nav mesh agents, just comment below and I can always look into doing one. But for the moment, coming back to this, our timeline is being kept here. So on one of my cameras here. So if we come over to timeline, you can see the only thing I'm doing here, make that bigger, is bouncing between the two virtual cams. The intro cam, which is on a dolly track. I'll have a look here. The dolly track that's going between here and here. And just a second virtual camera, which is the follow cam, which is just following our character as it moves. And you can see that in the scene. So initially in the scene, the camera starts down here near the bridge with this one here. And you see it starting to move and follow, but then it transitions to our follow cam and then swings around back to the dolly to finish off there. And the only other thing as well is you can see that menu then pops up. That's just being done with the animation on the dolly track virtual camera. Just at the end here, we have a signal, which is also being covered by a script for the menu to display. So again, pretty much the same combination as what we did in the setup on the other scene, just with the added nav mesh agent to control the character so that the character can walk along smoothly on an uneven surface. But that is pretty much how this particular scene here has been done. Well, that is it for this tutorial on Cinemachine and Timeline. I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, if you have any questions or suggestions, hit me up below, or better yet, jump onto the Discord channel. There you can share any screenshots of any problems that you're having, or better yet, show off some of your videos of any cutscenes that you make using Cinemachine and Timeline. So once again, thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and share to help grow our beautiful Unity community. And don't forget to hit that subscribe and notification button below to make sure you get to see our next video. See you shortly.